Hi, my name's Jeanette Pincus, and I get the honor of getting to speak with Jeri Finkelstein today. And first thing, Jeri, I wanted to ask you is tell me about your family, your parents, grandparents, some information that you'd like to share.
On my father's side, my grandparents came to the United States from Russia. My great-grandfather came from Russia to Ireland, and he and his brother, at the ages of 12 and 13, sold Bibles door to door to make a living. He eventually married Rebecca, my great-grandmother, and they moved to the United States. They had 10 children. It was the Lippman family, and they brought all their children from Chicago. Most of the children were born in Chicago, and they brought the children to Dallas. They lived in South Dallas. They lived with the other relatives, and my grandmother actually was a twin, and unfortunately her twin died when she was a small child, but that they were two of the 10 children in the Lippman family. And eventually my uncle Leonard Lippman, bought a home on the corner of Marquette and Hillcrest, and they lived in University Park. I do remember my great-grandmother being there in that house, and because he wasn't married, many of my great aunts also lived in the house with my great-grandmother and my uncle. Then on my mother's side, her parents came from Russia, I'm not sure exactly where, and my grandmother, and I called her Gammy, that's my grandmother name too, and Gammy was my favorite. That was my mother's mother. She lived in Fort Worth my whole life, and I used to spend summers with her in Fort Worth by myself. So I have so many memories of being with her. And she was somewhat of a free spirit. She loved to play cards, she played canasta, she had a lot of friends, she went out, she was very social, so it was a fun time for me. So she spoke Yiddish. She only spoke Yiddish when she didn't want me to hear something. So my mother, Lois Goldberg, had one sister, Sylvia. We called her Sissy. And Sissy was about 9 years older than my mother. She had no children, so we had no first cousins. I grew up in Dallas. We lived in different parts of Dallas, and I call it the Jewish wagon train that went from South Dallas straight down Preston or Hillcrest, gradually through University Park to Preston Hollow, with a few detours here and there, but finally made it to Midbury. And we were across the street from the JCC. So all my friends would ride their bikes. We all went to the JCC, and at that time, there was only a pool. The pool and the little building next to the pool. So we would ride down there every day of the summer because no one had a swimming pool in those days. And my best friend lived across the alley, and her home faced North Haven, and it was actually across the street from the J. I had other friends. I could name probably 10 people that were my friends that lived on North Haven. So Florence Donald Shapiro and Cheryl Leeds Iskowitz and Mark Miller and on and on. The Bolds lived on North Haven. So we were all in a Jewish community, and that's why I think even though the world was big, Dallas was big, and there were a lot of things that we could have been involved in, we really stayed very close to the Jewish community, and I think the JCC was really part of that.
What did your parents, grandparents, whatever they do for a living?
My father worked his entire life not his entire life, but most of his life for a commercial metals company. So his immediate boss was Bernard Shannon. Fanny Shannon, his wife, was a sister to Jake Feldman, who owned commercial metals and started it. And of course, as we all know, he is one of the biggest philanthropists when Israel became a state, a Jewish homeland. And my father always was giving money and had to be a pace setter. That was one of the requirements in order to move up the ladder at commercial metals, that you had to give your $10,000 to the Federation. And in those days, let's see, our bicycle was from the junkyard, our swing set was from the junkyard, some of our cars came from the scrapyard, and we made do. I mean, we had everything we wanted, but we didn't have a lot of money and nothing was extravagant. But I knew that my father gave that $10,000 to the Federation to help the community. So I think that it made an impression on me and my two brothers.
You already mentioned about the neighborhood, and I know you enjoyed going to the Jewish Community Center. Was there anything else that you did that was kind of fun that you'd say?
The entire family belonged to Shereth Israel, and when I was very young, Shereth Israel was still in South Dallas, and they were just purchasing the land at Douglas and building that building. So I do remember Rosh Hashanah services at the Forest Avenue Theater. I think the Forest Avenue Theater is still there in some form. And I somewhat remember going there for the high holidays that year. And the next year, we got to go to the new building at Shereth Israel. So my father was on the board, my mother was on the sisterhood, she was probably president of the sisterhood. Her cousin Ruthie Rosen was also president of the sisterhood. So those were our roots, the JCC and Shereth Israel.
Now, talking about experiences in school, where did you go to school?
I went to Cabell Elementary School, which of course now they had to change the name of Cabell because he was in the Confederate something. So we, for a short time, lived in Farmers Branch, which is right off of Forest and Marsh Lane. And after the school, after 7th grade, I went home and I told my daddy, everybody at Hebrew school, at Shereth Israel Hebrew School, is going to Benjamin Franklin, and I'm the only one that's not going. Well, 2 weeks later, he bought a home on Midbury. And it was even a surprise to my mother. So the whole family moved, and I got to go to junior high school in 8th grade with all my friends that I had made at Shereth Israel and BBYO, and after Benjamin Franklin, we went to Hillcrest High School. And after Hillcrest High School, no one asked me, where do you want to go to college? Do you want to go here? Do you want to look at that? They just said, okay, all of you get on the bus, we're going to Austin, and you're going to the University of Texas, which was great.
Were there any interest activities that you feel like you did that you want to share, like when you were in high school? And
mainly in high school, especially at Hillcrest High School. Most of the Jewish students and my Jewish friends were involved in BBYO. So I was in Jenny Zesmer BBYO, and I had a lot of friends in the different chapters. My mother's best friend was our advisor, and my mother was an advisor for another chapter at the same time. And it was just great. So I took advantage of many of the leadership training seminars they had, and the oratory and the contests and the speech contests. And I think really that's why I'm very comfortable speaking in front of people and talking about accomplishments and being involved in the community. So that was a big part of my life, BBYO.
You went to college, you mentioned, at UT in Austin. What did you study there?
I was in elementary education, just like all the rest of my friends, because our mothers told us, if you're not a teacher, you have to be a secretary, and you don't want to be a secretary. So we all knew we were getting a teaching degree. Very few of my friends were in other parts of the college. So here again, I'm with the same people from Hillcrest High School. There were a few people from Houston, a few people from out of state, not that many. And we all went to these classes like Kitty Literature, Kitty PE, Kitty Art, Kitty Music. And it was a lot of fun and very familiar. So even though there were 40,000 students, I was in a sorority. I was in A Phi, a Jewish sorority, with my friends. And it was just progressed from one place to the other, along with people that were close to me, that supported me, and I still have those friendships today.
You did mention already with us about the synagogue that you members of Share with Israel, and that y'all were very active to participate in that. Do you have any special memories of how you celebrate the Jewish holidays?
Most of the Jewish holidays, because my parents didn't have siblings, and the family members were my great aunts and uncles, and my dad's cousins were all in Dallas, and they ranged from older than my father to younger than my youngest brother. So that family really was the core. And I remember as a child, everything was at our home. I don't know if that's because we were the only ones that had a home big enough. And some of the things I remember going to my Aunt Margie Lippman, and she was very active at Temple Emmanuel. And she was an amazing person. We went to her home for some of the Seders, but almost everything was at our home. And so family would come to us to celebrate.
Going past that, after college, and talking about the holidays too, what did you do after college?
After college, when I was a senior, since my husband, Bill, was not asking me to get married, like everybody had to get married, you graduated, and so I'm progressing on from Benjamin Franklin, Hillcrest, UT, you get married, you go back to Dallas. Okay. So when Bill wasn't ready to get married after we graduated, my dad suggested I go somewhere else and teach school. So I accepted a job in Atlanta, Georgia, because my dad always said, you can always come home. So shortly after I went there, maybe 2 or 3 months, my story is Bill begged me to marry him. So by Thanksgiving, I had to quit my job in Atlanta. I moved back to Dallas, and we got married in February.
Oh. I know that you've been involved in a lot of civic organizations, and I don't know if you can share as many as you can with us of what you did, but maybe the main ones, or of whatever you could share with us on that.
I remember my mother being in B'nai B'rith Women, And I remember she was active, and they used to have musicals, they had fundraisers, and some of us always were tagging along with their mothers because who could afford a babysitter? And so gradually, from being very active in BBYO, I picked first B'nai B'rith women to be involved. And I did that for many years until I was on the local boards, the regional boards, the national board, and I did a lot of development work for them. At that time, B'nai B'rith women had a home in Israel that started really as an orphanage after the Holocaust, and we called it the B'nai B'rith Children's Home. So most of my work in fundraising went to support that home in Israel. And so for years, we gave money to improve the home.
Okay, and then what else have you been involved with?
Well, I was very involved at the JCC, and that, again, that was a natural move for me. I was on the board of directors when I was 20-something, and I'm sitting on the board of directors because next to me are my dad's friends, so most of the men, and they would turn around, we're all board members, and they would say, "Honey, will you get me some coffee?" So we have progressed since then. That was my first experience on a board. I was active in the JCC. I was president of the PTO in the preschool at the JCC where my kids attended. Mm-hmm. And my oldest daughter, Robin, was actually in the preschool the first year of the JCC building. So after it was Julia Shep's Community Center, it became the Jewish Community Center of Dallas. And they built the building and the preschool, and Robin was 3 years old, and she was in the first year of the preschool. I was on the board for several years. I became the treasurer of the board of directors. I was Leader of the Year award, and always very active here. I've been on the board of Israel Bonds. I'm still on the board of Israel Bonds. Been very active in other organizations like Jewish National Fund and many others.
Also, tell me about what you've done with what I remember you were telling with the bingo. That was such an important thing for like our organization.
Yes. In the 1980s, I believe George Bush was the governor of Texas at that time, and Texas applied to conduct charitable bingo in the state of Texas. Most states in the United States have charitable bingo. The state makes quite a bit of money through the bingo games, and it was supposed to go to, I'm not sure where it really went, but it was supposed to go to education in the state of Texas. Because I was the regional board chair of B'nai B'rith Women, I found out that only a 501c3 could be licensed to conduct bingo at a bingo hall. So I had people calling me on the phone that wanted to be in the industry. They wanted to do it for money, but they couldn't do it because they needed a 501c3. So I had all kinds of people calling me all the time, you know, to get a license, and this is all you have to do, and this is how you can make money. That was the 1980s. So I acquired licenses for the 6 chapters of B'nai B'rith Women, and money started coming in. I knew that I had to be fiscally responsible, but other than that, I didn't have to play bingo. I didn't have to go there and pass out cards and so forth. But it was under the TABC at that time, when we started. Shortly after that, Texas developed or appointed a lottery commission, and the lottery started here in the late 1980s. And the city manager, who was Jan Hart, called me and she said, "Will you be on the first charitable..." Ooh. How do you do that? Okay. So the city manager at that time was Jan Hart, and she knew of me because I was on the unpaid worker list, which is a professional volunteer. And she called me and she said, "Will you be on this lottery commission? And will you chair the committee for charitable bingo?" And I said, "No." But eventually she talked me into it. And I had to go, I was required to go to Austin 4 times a year to be on the lottery committee. When she called me back, she said, "The good news is you're on the committee, but the bad news is you have to chair the committee." Which meant for the next 4 years, about twice a month for 4 years, I had to fly to Austin. I stayed with my in-laws and my sister-in-law. I kept my things there, and by the time I was through, after the 4 years of going to the legislature and making all the laws and guidelines for charitable bingo, my 2 daughters that were at UT were just sick of seeing me come into town twice a month. So, but it was an interesting time. We were able to we put that money into the Dallas Jewish Community Foundation. As soon as we got our percentage of the proceeds, we would put that money in our foundation account. And because I was one of the advisors of that fund, we were able to elect to give that money to this Jewish Women International Children's Home in Israel. So it was the same home for emotionally disturbed children. It was in Israel, and I would say over a period of many, many years, we donated at least $3 million.
Wow.
And that's from charitable bingo.
Wow.
It was a great thing. So I wanted to share that with other organizations. So I went to the Federation, and they thought, well, I don't know what this is. We don't need a permit. So I went to the Jewish Historical Society, and they said, yes, we'd like to have a permit. So we helped them get through it. They were licensed by the state of Texas to conduct bingo. That was maybe at least 25 years ago. And so the Historical Society's been getting checks in the mail every month for the last 25 to 30 years. I also got 2 permits for Akiba Academy that wanted them. I went to the other agencies, and nobody else really was interested. But we were getting a lot of proceeds, and we were able to help a lot of people through this. We gave $5,000 grants to many of the organizations in Dallas where their goal was to help children and families in need. Women, children, and families build better lives. And so there are so many, I can't name them, but we gave grants annually. Then the time came when I think the members of our B'nai B'rith women wanted something locally to hang on to. This was about the time the Jewish Family Service started their program for special needs. And we had so many meetings about the special needs group, and instead of making it its own 501c3, they created a department under Jewish Family Service. And so I'm proud to say that our local recipient of our grant was the special needs program at Jewish Family Service, and we started them with $150,000, and we donated to them, when they wrote a grant, around $80,000 a year for their programming. So it was a great thing for so many charities and 501c3 organizations, for synagogues, churches, and schools to be able to benefit from these proceeds.
That's wonderful. You mentioned that you married Bill almost right out of college. And then, tell us a little bit about your children, your grandchildren.
First, I have to tell you about Bill.
Okay.
Okay, then I'll get to
Okay.
this. Okay. So, Bill Finkelstein and I dated from our freshman year through our senior year. He was my third date at college. I was in the AFI house, and in those days, you had a date card, and you had to stand there in the sorority house while all the pledges from the boys' fraternities came to each house, and they would pick a girl, and they would ask them out for a night. So I don't think they do that anymore. Good thing.
Yeah.
So Bill was my Wednesday date of the first week of college, and the rest is history. But a funny story is, when we first went out, he had a ring that said WBF. So I said, oh, well, what does WBF stand for? He said, well, my mother's maiden name was Wild, W-I-L-D-E, and so she named me Wild Bill Finkelstein. And I believed him. Till my mother went, I don't think so. And he was wild. And he was the life of the party. He was president of the fraternity. He was president of the pledge class. He was a leader. So I always said, I'm picking somebody with strong goals and objectives. And he was that person. But a funny story is, the first month of college, of course, the high holidays came in September. So Bill asked me, will you go to the high holidays? Will you go to my synagogue with me? So I called my parents, and they said, you can stay in Austin if you go to synagogue. So all the students in those days sat in the very, very back of the sanctuary, and then the auditorium, and I think actually the chairs were on the stage in the way back. So we go in, and Bill takes me, and we sit on the front row in the real chairs of the synagogue. And I'm thinking, I just don't understand what's going on. This wild person, drinking beer and dancing and having a good time. What are we doing here? So I noticed he knew the whole service. He's davening. He was the shofar blower at a Good Asachim conservative synagogue in Austin since his bar mitzvah. And he is still blowing the shofar at Shari Tefillah. So I saw a different side of this young man at that time, and I said, okay, this was meant to be. And about, 4.5 years later, we were married.
How long have you been married?
We've been married 51.5 years. We were married in February of 1972, and Bill started Baylor Law School 2 weeks, I think it was 2 weeks or a week after our wedding. Waco, Texas. The best thing about Waco was it was halfway in between Dallas and Austin. So we would go see these friends and those friends, and Bill was going to Baylor. Well, at Baylor, they had never seen Jewish people. And they had all kinds of strange questions they would ask us all the time. And he was the only Jewish person in the law school. And Baylor was so strict and very Baptist, and they did not allow smoking on campus. So the only cigarette machine, if any of you know what a cigarette machine is, you put your money in and the pack of cigarettes came out the bottom, was in the law school. And they deemed the law school off campus. It wasn't part of the university at that time. So we started law school, and I started working, and eventually I became a teacher in Waco. And it was great. We had a good time, graduated.
And came back home, hit to Dallas.
No, we did not come back home to Dallas. Bill decided he was going to apply to be an intern for the Supreme Court of Texas. So he was chosen to be an intern for one of the Supreme Court judges in Texas. So we moved to Austin. And I was just about to give birth to Robin during that year. And I kept thinking, I need to be where my mother is. So eventually, when he was through with his clerkship at the Supreme Court, he joined a law firm and we moved to Dallas. And that was the beginning of our life here.
And now tell us about your children and your
Okay.
grandchildren.
So as I said, Robin was born during, right after we had moved to Austin, which was after law school. And she grew up, well, just that first year we were in Austin, then we moved to Dallas, but she really grew up in Dallas. And like I said earlier, she did go to the JCC preschool when she was 3 years old. And then 2 years later, 2.5 years, our daughter Lisa was born. And we lived at that time on Charlestown, which is near Preston, across from the aerobic center. And when we lived on Charlestown, we had 3 bedrooms. Then I found out we're having Shayna. So we had our 3rd girl in 1980, and we needed a bigger house, we needed more room, so we went looking for homes. I found one home, and I wanted this home so much, and it was twice as much as we could afford. So every day I would go look at the model home, I would think, oh, someday, someday. And I have to tell you that this very day, my daughter, Robin, and her family live in that house.
Oh my gosh.
She bought it from my brother, Neil Goldberg. And when he was going to marry Lisa Husky, he said, I need a home. And he didn't know it, but that was the home he bought. And years later, he decided they needed a bigger home, and my daughter and son-in-law bought the house.
That is something. Okay, now tell us about your grandchildren.
Okay. Robin was married in Dallas. She had a traditional wedding, Westin Hotel. All my friends were there. We planned the wedding together, and she and Evan moved to New York for a short period of time. But when they knew they were having twins, again, they decided, I need to be where my mother and grandmother are. So they eventually moved back to Dallas. They had Katie and Lexi, our first grandchildren, who are now 18, and went to college yesterday. They just took off. And it was an exciting time. So they lived for us for a little while till they found a house. And they eventually moved, and they all grew up in Dallas. My daughter Lisa, who wanted to go to design school after the University of Texas, went to a few design schools, and she decided she was going to go to Los Angeles to be in the business. So she worked for a designer for a number of years in Los Angeles, and eventually knew that she had to go to New York if she really wanted to be in the fashion design business. So after she grew up in Dallas, she went to the JCC, she went to Solomon Schechter, which is now Levine, and on to the University of Texas, design school, and now she has her own businesses and she is a designer. But the best part is, although COVID was terrible and those years were very hard, she moved to Dallas, Texas. She and her family live here, and her husband Armand have 2 children, Asher and Ivy, and they're 9 and 10 years old. Then my daughter Shayna decides they're moving to Dallas. Now they had lived in London for 12 years. She had all 3 children in London. So Shayna and Sam is Brit, that's why they lived in London, decided they were moving to Dallas. So they moved here a few years ago. They lived upstairs in our house. They lived there for about 5 months, and they went shopping for a house. But then the terrible tornado came. They couldn't find a house, so they really had to stay at our home longer than expected. Then they found a house on Midbury. So when my daughter comes home, Shayna says, "Oh, we found a house we're going to lease on Midbury." I said, "Really? What's the address?" She said 7530 Midbury. I said, "I grew up in that house. Kenny, Neil, and I, when we were going to Benjamin Franklin and Kramer Elementary School, grew up in that house." So that's another coincidence.
Wow.
I was able at that time to take my parents there. So they were still living. We took our parents to the home. Part of the home still existed. The rest of it had been remodeled, but they just had memories of that home and us growing up, and it was great.
Looking back, getting the opportunity to live in Dallas, how do you feel Dallas has changed over the years? What as a Jewish community as well as the city itself?
Oftentimes, I meet people because I'm so involved in other organizations and other activities that take me outside of my original best friends, take me outside of the JCC, and take me outside of Shereth Israel and what synagogue we belonged to at that time, whether it was Tiferet Israel and then Shari Tefillah and Chabad. We were very active in Chabad. So I am able to understand that Plano, we are just moving north. Here's the wagon train I talked about at the beginning. South Dallas, University Park, Preston Hollow, near the JCC across the street, just kept moving north. And now I meet so many people from Frisco, from Plano, and they can't believe I'm from Dallas. And I say, well, my parents were born in Dallas. My grandmother came here when she was 3 years old and lived in University Park. So it's really interesting that the newcomers, and I say newcomers, they might have been here 40 years, just can't believe that I have friends that I grew up with in Dallas, but I do.
Looking back at everything that we've talked about, is there anybody you feel like you had mentioned, like your parents?
I didn't name all my grandchildren, which could be a problem.
Okay, let's go ahead and let's do that.
Okay, so I don't know how they can put it back, and I guess they'll figure it out. Okay. So fortunately, Bill and I created a family in Dallas, Texas. We have 3 daughters, Robin, Lisa, and Shayna. And as I said earlier, Robin was married here. Then her children came to Dallas. They were in New York for a few years. Katie and Lexi were my first grandchildren. They're now 18, and they took off for college yesterday morning. We kissed goodbye for the time being. They have a brother, Jack, and Jack is 16 years old. And during COVID, I think he was about 5'2", and today he's 6'2". So he's really growing up fast. He's a junior at Greenhill. Then my daughter Lisa, that eventually moved to Dallas and lives here currently, has 2 children, Asher and Ivy. They're 9 and 10 years old. And Lisa, her husband Armand, have a home in Dallas, which is great. She started her business in New York, Lele Sadugi, and she brought the business to Dallas and opened her first store in Highland Park Village. And on Labor Day, we are going to the opening of her 5th store in Nashville. Wow. So it's all very exciting, and I get all the samples. Our youngest daughter, Shayna, lived in London. Her husband is British. They lived there for 12 years. Take a drink. Let's see, where did I leave off? Okay. Our youngest daughter, Shayna, grew up in Dallas, went to Solomon Schechter, went to Greenhill, graduated from Hillcrest High School, met someone, British, and they moved to London. They lived there for 12 years, and they had their children there. So Sam and Shayna decided they were going to move back to Dallas right before COVID. It was very exciting. It was very nice. And Sam and Shayna have 3 children. So the oldest is Evie, then Charlie, and Leo. And they're 7, 9, and 11. And I have, with Bill, we have 8 grandchildren. And they're all in Dallas. I have 2 brothers. My 2 brothers are Kenny Goldberg and Neil Goldberg. Kenny and Sherry have 9 grandchildren. And Neil and Lisa have 4 children. And Neil's oldest son, Chad, has 3 grandchildren. So I have to tell you that my parents had 21 grandchildren. Every single one of them live in Dallas, and 18 of them are 11 and under. Wow. So they're all friends, which was a shock to Kenny and Neil and I because we never had a first cousin. It's great. Every holiday, every birthday, every anniversary, we can celebrate with our family, and they're all here. I think there are 42 of us. And we call it the Goldberg Dynasty.
It sounds like what you're most proud of is your family, with all the things that you've accomplished. But that really sounds like
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yes, my family is very important to me, and I learned that really from my parents. Mm-hmm. Family was everything to them, and Kenny, Neil, and I wanted to always honor my parents by growing the family, supporting the family, and taking care of other people.
So your parents really were your role models?
Yes, they were.
Yeah, really. I want to appreciate you sharing all this with us. Is there anything else that you think comes to mind that you would like to share with us?
Well, one thing that I did leave out was my occupation in Dallas, Texas. So after being a teacher in Waco, Texas, then moving to Austin, being a substitute teacher, and then moving to Dallas, where at that time, once you had a baby, you weren't expected to work. So that's when I became a professional volunteer. I learned many things by taking part in every leadership development class or organization I could join. And I went to the Center for Nonprofit Management in downtown Dallas, owned by the Meadows Foundation. And I took courses in strategic planning and development work. So as volunteers, I would have a partner, and we would go out to other nonprofit organizations and help them with strategic planning. I did that for a few years. So I knew how to do it, I knew what to do. I wasn't being paid for this, but that was my occupation. At that time, my husband, Bill, became very involved in the Vod HaKashrus of Dallas, which does business as Dallas Kosher. So Bill comes to me in 1989. He says, "Can you do a strategic plan for this organization? I'm going to make it a 501c3 nonprofit organization. It's going to be a membership organization, and can you do a strategic plan?" So I took 6 or 9 months, did a survey, interviewed people. We did the strategic plan. I go before their board, which is a group of men, that most of them my friends, and we were at the home of Daryl and Janice Marovitz. I remember this. And I give them the report, and I said, "You can't expect a rabbi to do this on his own. First thing, you have to have a manager." And they just sat there quietly and looked at me and said, "Will you do that?" And I said, "I'll do it under 2 conditions. Do not pay me, because I'm going to do it my way or the highway. And if you don't get paid, you can develop it your way." That eventually grew into a real job. I became executive director of Dallas Kosher in 1995. I have tried to retire 3 times, but I'm still there. And now I'm president of the board of directors, and again, I don't get paid. When living in Dallas, and Bill and I were moving from our home on Kenshire, which served its purpose. We lived there, raised our children for 30 years, and we think we're going to downsize. In the meantime, I draw plans for the house I want, my dream house. And we look and look. We thought, it's too hard to build a house. I'm not going to use these plans, but I'm going to give them to an architect to draw to scale. So we got the plans from the architect, but we never built the house. I'm going to my brother Neil's house often, and when I'm driving there, I see they're building 2 new homes. So I called the builder and I say, "Will you take me in to see these homes that weren't finished yet?" So he takes me into the first home, and I look around. It was Ron Smith, and his wife was Abby Shapiro, who was in my Zesmer BBG class, group. Ron shows me the house, and I said, "This is the house I drew. This is the house." And he said, "Well, where did you get the plan?" I said, "The plans were drawn up by John Brooks." He said, "That's who I bought the plans from." So because I was around the corner from my brother Neil, I had just happened to see this house being built. I called Ron and Abby Smith. They showed me the house, and although we were going to downsize, I said, "Bill, we are buying this house." So we've been in that home since 2005, and it's just been a pleasure. We have room for the whole entire 42 people at a Seder. It's just great, and we love having meetings and events at our home, and it's always open.
Jeri, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
My
It's
pleasure.
wonderful. Thank
My pleasure.
you.